other media aspects, The Mummy, Katy Perry's The Dark Horse. I just need to sit down and listen. So go ahead, Rowan.
All right. Thank you for that introduction. As I'm sure you all know by now, I am Rowan Height. Pronouns are they, he. And my thesis is about, the over-sexualization and fetishization of Egyptian women, beginning with pharaohs and queens, and how that impacts the media portrayal of these women as a whole. So my thesis, so throughout many pieces of modern media concerning female pharaohs, they're portrayed through an Orientalist lens that serves to spread misinformation about the nature of their power as rulers. So one question that must be addressed before fully delving in is Orientalism. What is it? Well, it's a term created by Edward Said, who was one of the first academics to pursue studies in post-colonialism. And it refers to the othering of the Orient in Western culture, particularly through cultural biases and propaganda in the academic sphere. So now, what is othering? Othering refers to the labeling of individuals or cultures as differing from societal norms. So, although Said originally applies Orientalism in the context of the Orient in the West, it can also be applied to historical propaganda surrounding ancient Egypt. Because ancient Egypt, when we think of it today, we often think of a land of mysticism and magic, this kind of mysterious appeal, a land where anything can happen. And unfortunately, this has led to the fetishization of a people. But how did we get here? Well, it started with Plutarch. It started in Rome, as so many things do. So Plutarch was a Roman historian. He wrote a lot of biographies on key Roman political figures. One such was an account of the life of Mark Antony. And so he's notable in this account for portraying Cleopatra as a clever manipulator of strong Roman figures like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. He depicts these great Romans, as falling victim to this foreign queen's wiles. And I'm going to read you a couple of quotes, a couple of excerpts from this life of Antony. Judging by the proofs which she had had before this, of the effect of her beauty upon Caius Caesar and Gnaeus the son of Pompey, she had hopes that she would more easily bring Antony to her feet. She was going to visit Antony at the very time when women have the most brilliant beauty and are at the acme of intellectual power. She went putting her greatest confidence in herself and in the charms and sorceries of her own person. And another quote. To converse with her had an irresistible charm. Her presence, there was sweetness also in the tones of her voice, and her tongue, like an instrument of many strings, she could readily turn to whatever language she pleased. So these excerpts place an emphasis on her manipulation through her physical beauty, through her charms, and through the sorceries that she possesses. And it frames her very much as a mysterious and magical foreign queen, a threat to good, upstanding Roman men, like Caesar and Antony. It is important to note, Plutarch was writing approximately 100 years after her death. So his account is a little questionable. Another Roman figure, another Roman historian that we draw our concept of Cleopatra from is Cassius Dio. His account was inspired by Plutarch's, and he is writing almost 2.5 centuries after Cleopatra's death. Another quote from Cassius Dio this time. For she was a woman of surpassing beauty, and at that time, when she was in the prime of her youth, she was most striking. She also possessed a most charming voice and a knowledge of how to make herself agreeable to everyone. So again, we have more emphasis on her physical beauty and her voice, which are both very superficial traits. Instead of this like master manipulator that Plutarch kind of presents with like extremely high intelligence, we get this people pleaser queen. Without emphasis on her intellect, the narrative changes from an intelligent queen posing a threat to Rome. And we get this beautiful queen who just does what she can to appease the powerful Romans, which really removes a considerable amount of her agency as a historical figure. So, I'm sure a couple of you here are at least familiar with the 1963 film Cleopatra, starring Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra. This is why we should care about these two Roman historians. They have an impact on later media. So, what effect do they have on our perception of Egypt and its queens? Well, Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra is heavily derived from Plutarch and Cassius Dio's accounts. There's a scene in the film where she smuggles herself to Caesar in a rolled-up rug to gain an audience with him. So this is inspired by Cassius Dio's account. Another quote. She adorned and beautified herself so as to appear before him in the most majestic and at the same time pity-inspiring guise. So the movie goes to great lengths to portray Cleopatra as a scheming seductress, aiming to grow her political power by manipulating Caesar and Antony. So the emphasis placed on her is distinctly as Egyptian, as a foreigner, even though historically Cleopatra was of Macedonian descent. The Romans also did this during her lifetime. They spread propaganda to establish her more as a foreign threat, as other. They did this to illegitimize her power and to distance her from the Greek and Macedonian culture, which Rome respected. So the source of Cleopatra's power in this film mainly lies in her seduction of these Roman men. Another modern example, The Mummy, 1999, starring Brendan Fraser. So, shifting now to how Cleopatra's portrayal has impacted that of other Egyptian women in films, there is a character in The Mummy who is one of the antagonists, Ankh-Sunamun. Now, she is likely named after Ankhesenamun, who was the daughter of Nefertiti and Akhenaten. And in the film, this character is portrayed, she's a mistress of Seti I. And she's portrayed as scantily clad. Her clothing is almost non-existent. She's only clad in basically black and gold body paint. And her role that she plays to kind of kick the action into gear, so she's shown as seducing the pharaoh and his head priest, Imhotep. She plots to kill the pharaoh, die, and be revived by Imhotep through necromancy when the pharaoh finds out that she was having an affair with his head priest. So obviously this is a very fictional portrayal, but it suggests that mistresses of the pharaoh, these Egyptian women, they are cunning, they are sultry, and they are involved with a sort of magic and mysticism that just pervades the land of Egypt. So naming the character after a real queen or basing the name on a real queen encourages this notion that powerful Egyptian women must be associated with some kind of sexual scandal or general promiscuity, which further alienates Egypt as a foreign land of mysticism and sexual deviance. So this character has two main sources of power in this film. With the pharaoh, it's her physical beauty. He desires her because she is gorgeous. And with Imhotep, the priest, it's her beauty and her capacity for mysticism, which both feed into this Orientalist lens. Moving on to the Dark Horse music video by Katy Perry, she creates this kind of pharaoh persona, an enchantress that overpowers her suitors with magic. So the visual impression of this video is an Egypt filled with magic, enchanting pharaohs, and femme fatale queens. It supports this Orientalist mysticism through this portrayal of magic everywhere in Egypt. The lyrics also show misinformation about Egypt. One of the lines, "Make me your Aphrodite, make me your one and only." This Aphrodite reference shows clear confusion surrounding the difference between Greek and Egyptian myth. Aphrodite is the Greek goddess of sex and sexual desire. So this could suggest, and likely does, that the pharaoh persona's motivations are amorous in nature, that she is a sexual being and that is her purpose. Another line in the chorus, "So you want to play with magic." This feeds again into the idea of mysticism surrounding Egypt, supporting ideas of a land where fantasies can come true. In turn, this leads to fetishizing the queens first, and then the other women of Egypt. And this pharaoh persona's main source of power was either love magic or sex magic. It is unclear. Switching gears, historical figures. Nefertiti and Hatshepsut are two of the most notable female queens or pharaohs, aside from Cleopatra, who we've already discussed. Now, we've gone over media portrayals where the main form power took for these women was related to their sexuality. But to emphasize these historical figures' capabilities, one must consider their actions, acknowledging the historical revisionism of the Romans and how that's impacted modern media portrayals. So Nefertiti presented herself as masculine in a famous bust housed in the Nuez Museum. Wearing a crown resembling a capreche, which is the pharaoh's war crown, she shows herself as active in a traditionally masculine role, a war leader. Now, this demonstrates competence as a political leader because she had to have succeeded politically for anyone to follow her into combat. So her main source of power here, historically, seems to be political competence, not sexuality. Hatshepsut consistently and aggressively portrayed herself as masculine. She wore the false beard of pharaohs, depicted herself with the crook and flail that symbolized kingship. She wore the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt, showing that she alone could unite the two. Hatshepsut's power also seems to be in political competence as a creator of successful propaganda. So this political competence that they showed through these masculine appearances has to do with an Egyptian concept called Mot. Now, Mot can best be described as kind of a balance between opposites, but opposites that can work together, such as masculine and feminine. So, in the Egyptian pantheon, every male god has a female counterpart. This is to maintain Mot. Pharaohs had queens to help them maintain Mot. But what happens when the pharaoh is a woman, not a man? The woman must show that she is capable of fulfilling both roles, masculine and feminine, and sustaining Mot on her own. So once again, it takes significant political competence to be able to do this alone. So in conclusion, Egypt has a rich culture full of concepts like Mot and a rich history of unique female pharaohs and powerful queens. Unfortunately, due to Orientalist influences, like that of Plutarch and Cassius Dio, much of that history is lost and replaced with harmful ideas about Egyptian women as sexual objects first and individuals second. Thank you.
We have time for questions for Roland.
I have a question. I really find this topic to be really fascinating, and I'm so glad you decided to share that. First of all, I just want to make sure, I wanted to make sure I have the history, because I don't know the full history. was Cleopatra kind of because you're right, it is portrayed as Cleopatra being this mistress, right? She was cheating and then she ran over and decided to take over and then got rid of her, she got rid of the problem, or that's how it's facilitated. Is there truth in that? Because the story from what I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is like what I said, she was mistress and then killed one king to become, kind of to take over.
Yes.
I'm just dying to say.
No.
I'm with you.
Sarden's back there shaking her
head.
head, and I agree with you, Sarden.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
No. Cleopatra was a brilliant mind, from what we can tell. She spoke many languages. She was very well educated. She seemed to be a quite successful diplomat. This concept we have of her now is mostly Roman propaganda. Unfortunately, that is most of what has survived.
Okay, that kind of changes my perspective. I guess I have kind of two questions, because what the first question I'll ask you is how much of, because you talked about Cleopatra and women Pharaohs being projected as being beautiful and sultry, how much of that though has to do with feminine energy? Because from a male's perspective, especially growing up, I didn't discredit. I am at a heightened awareness now that you've shared that with me, but I never discredited any of them as being less intelligent. It just added to the whole thing. Being a male, kind of growing up, it was kind of being like in awe, like, oh wow, she's like beautiful and powerful, and so how much of that goes into like the story what you were displaying to us, how much of that has to do with feminine energy? Because you did talk about masculinity and feminine, so the portrayal part, how much of it has to do with like the presence of a woman dominant female having feminine energy, like behold, this woman is sultry, beautiful, powerful, intelligent.
So in the context of the ancient world, particularly ancient Rome, women were not so highly valued. In fact, Rome, with many of its goddesses, took them down a peg, separated them and distributed their powers among other gods and goddesses, because they did not want women to have power. They wanted to establish this idea of like strong male leadership. And it's important to keep in mind the initial Roman like roots of the idea. I myself find myself charmed by these ideas of like this beautiful, intelligent, cunning woman. But it's important to remember that initially that was not its intent. It was meant to be, deceitful, tricky women, don't trust them. We can't trust them with power. Unfortunately.
That leads me kind of to my second question. I'm speaking again from a male's perspective, so it's kind of a two-part question. The first one is, first of all, I just want to say, like, from a male's perspective, if you've had any experience that's gone bad, with a female, you associate it sometimes, to say, like, from a man's perspective, and probably women do too, she has tricky women that are out to deceive and be deceptive, right? So that leads me to the second part of the question, right? That is due probably to an inexperience or maybe some sort of discrimination or whatever I was exposed to around me. So should we teach young men, right? Because we want young men to be capable and grow up to be men. Do we need to kind of change this way that we this perspective as such. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Do we need to reteach men, right? From a different perspective. If we want men to, see these pharaohs, right, or see women in general to be intelligent, capable, political, empowering women, do we need to reteach through education?
I think the issue lies not necessarily in like classroom education, but in like media representation. And luckily we are seeing, not necessarily, unfortunately with Egypt, but we are seeing more strong, capable, intelligent female characters that are those things before they are beautiful. They are intelligent before they are beautiful. They are quick-witted, and they are people before they are their physical beauty, which that is the issue I think that we run into most with like female pharaoh portrayal in media, is they're portrayed as like, ooh, different, sexy, and then portrayed as, oh, and ruler of a kingdom, by the way.
By the way,
Yeah.
It does kind of change the image, doesn't it? It definitely changes the image and the way that people perceive. And, I think a contributor to that is awareness, right? Because if you're not aware, you don't know, you don't know any different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, Ron, do you know, as you just shared what you did, just specific examples you could think of in today's culture, either pop culture or literature or Madeleine Albright? I mean, what are examples of the woman being valued first for her intellectual or political prowess?
It's going to be bad that I can't think of one now. I don't. We've seen kind of, I guess, to take Star Wars as an example, Leia has gone through like an evolution. Initially, she was pretty woman, yay,
Yeah.
she can do the thing, good for her. Yeah, but now, with more recent films, we've got not just Leia as beautiful or as love interest. We have Leia as general. We have Leia as like political figure, showing that she has power outside of her physicality. And I think that's a very important example. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
And another
That's a good
example, like, I don't know if any of you have seen the animated series She-Ra, the new version, the reboot. That is so focused. The main characters are, it's so nice. They're not portrayed as being in this weird love triangle that we usually get. They're portrayed as individuals with, before any of their like interpersonal, like romantic relationships, they're dealing with a world-ending threat, and that takes precedence over, oh, things are awkward between me and this guy because he likes me now, and I don't know if I like him back. But,
thank you for that summary portrayal. Quality characterization. Other questions?
I do have a question. It's kind of aimed towards both of you, right? Because you guys are kind of in the same perspective on some level. So I guess like you guys have presented an issue, right? So what about women who kind of portray the opposite spectrum? You get women like, I'm gonna use Nicki Minaj, for example, that is in heightening her power right behind obviously like her looks and her sexuality. And in the past we've had women do the same thing, Madonna, you've had lots of women that have kind of taken that angle. And I want to hear you guys' view, like your perspective on that, because that contributes, right? It contributes because you have young males and young females that are growing up and they see that, and for whatever reason they're drawn to that. You know, how do we kind of draw them away from that and get their interest? Because I think that can be part of the problem too, because now they're growing up thinking, hey, I'm gonna be a celebrity and having this unrealistic life. All I have to do is like display myself in this image, and I don't have to worry about education or being taking part in politics or any of those sorts of things that kind of would lead to that image.
So to women who want to own their sexuality like that, Megan Thee Stallion, Nicki Minaj, etc., I say good for them. Absolutely good for them. But we have to keep in mind intersectionality and the ways in which race, religion, sexuality play in. And I think there's a very different connotation because these women are choosing to sexualize themselves, whereas these more ancient figures like Cleopatra, like Hatshepsut, like Nefertiti, they were not sexualizing themselves. These foreign men
Projected it on them.
projected it onto them. Thank you.
These historians?
The historians
we-
do
we-
that?
we-
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah. But I mean, so yeah, like, but the thing is, historians, I think people think that historians are completely unbiased,
No.
right? And that historians are scholars who just, and that's not true in the present, and especially not in the past. Right, especially not in the past, right? Like to define Plutarch as a historian, I think is I really wish
Yes.
to use air quotes, right?
I was going to and I didn't.
Because Plutarch didn't, I mean, the concept of a historian didn't exist then, but that's not what Plutarch would have defined himself as. Anyway, he had an agenda, right? As did Cassius Dio. And Cassius Dio, for sure, his agenda was to glorify Rome. And so he's going to cast everyone who's not Roman as an other in a very specific way.
Glorify Rome in Roman histories?
Right,
What?
right,
Shocking.
right. And so these biases are really coming into play. And I really liked what you said about this idea of them kind of, the way that they talk about Cleopatra, they describe everything that she does as if it is solely focused on Rome and solely focused on her relationship with Rome. Whereas all the other sources that we have indicate that Cleopatra was only involved with Rome insofar as it would ensure the continued independence of Egypt as a kingdom, that she could rule on her own and maybe develop an empire like Rome's, but in Asia, right? Like she had all of these other ambitions and these other focuses, and Rome was just a means to an end for her. And so this is where this idea of really thinking about, and this is what historians do, right? We look at the historical sources, but we also interrogate them, and we question them and question the narrative that they're presenting to them. And I think that idea is really important in education, right? To teach students of all kinds of students, right, at all levels, to really think about the information that they're receiving, the sources that they're receiving information or media or entertainment from, right? Like to think about, why are these people presenting themselves in this way, right? Like, why is this the narrative that the media is using? Why is, it's the character Harley Quinn. I haven't actually seen the Suicide Squad movies, but I've read about how, that one of the films depicts her through a male gaze and a different film depicts her through a female gaze. And the way that she's costumed, like the slight differences in the costume and the camera angle, right, really demonstrate that, right? And I feel like if we can encourage students, young men, young women, to really be aware of the fact that everyone who's presenting something to you has a reason for presenting it, right? Like everyone's got a bias or a purpose that's behind what they're presenting, whether they're presenting themselves or whether they're presenting someone else, right? And in that way, we can begin to kind of understand and interrogate these elements of our culture, right, that are related to sex and gender and race, right? Like we can really begin to kind of dig into that a little bit. And so yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how I started talking about it, but I got very excited. So yeah,
We're excited with you.
The convergences between all three of your topics have been really interesting to see, right? To see, because when you look at them on the page, you know, in the abstracts, you're like, I kind of see connections here, but then when you start talking and we all start talking together, it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of connections and conversation to be had. It's so exciting. Abigail, did you have something to add there?
Kind of, like to circle back to your original question and also piggyback of like how people are presenting things in a certain way. There is something to be said too, that there's a long history of Black women being hypersexualized as well, and that I don't know if this is Cardi B or Nicki Minaj's intention, but I would like to imagine that they're kind of reclaiming that for themselves. Mm-hmm. Like if you're going to project this on me, I'm going to do it in a powerful way for my own purposes.
Take control of it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I like to imagine that that's maybe an element of it.
I'd say that's a good perspective on it, at least. Here's your, yeah, that's very interesting, yeah. Individuality, it sounds like there are some, you know, there's some perspective that people take on, as women and as men that are individual. And so I guess it's looking at that as, what do you guys want to, or what do each, you know, want to kind of empower, you know, as a standing kind of as a community and culture, like what you are able to embrace and what you should kind of, you know, view, I guess, to be improper or false.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.